Hello, everyone. It's impossible for me to launch back into a Dragon Ball video without taking a moment to acknowledge the recent passing of its creator, Toriyama Akira. While many writers have worked on various incarnations of the series, it's undeniable that Dragon Ball is an author-driven story. The Dragon World is and always has been Toriyama's world, and Dragon Ball will never be the same again. It feels weird to even be talking about this event in a video review of Dragon Ball GT, the Dragon Ball series specifically known for having less Toriyama in it. However, a lot of you seemed to think my release the same week of the GT special video, with its themes of legacy and the passage of time, was serendipitously appropriate. I was glad to see viewers taking some degree of solace in that. I'm writing this section the day after the news became public, which is a week after he actually passed, and it's going to be more weeks still before anyone even hears what I'm saying right now. As such, it's hard not to feel like I'm completely disconnected from this. And part of me feels that's as it should be. I wanted some time to pass. Those closest to Toriyama kept this to themselves for a week, a choice I completely respect. They had that time to celebrate his life without all of us. Given how notoriously reclusive the man was, that seems appropriate, and I don't want to intrude on that. But it goes without saying that Toriyama-sensei left an indelible impact on me, and presumably everybody watching this right now. I would not have devoted 12 years of my life to Dragon Ball Dissection if the art he created hadn't moved me on a deeply personal level. I cannot overstate how much it has impacted the trajectory of my life. From my friendships, to the fact that talking about Dragon Ball has been a substantial part of my job for the past 4 years. I love it dearly, and I will always have Toriyama Akira to thank for it. That's really all I have to say. And now, we're going to do what we always do. So I hope we can have the kind of unrestrained, ridiculous fun that Toriyama always inspired us to have. Let's live every day like a boy on a magical cloud, striving to constantly better himself, like a robot girl excitedly running around with a glob of poop on the end of a stick. I can think of no better tribute than that. Double your cyborg, double your fun? Well, I don't know if that formula holds true, but that doesn't mean Dragon Ball GT isn't going to try. It's Dragon Ball Dissection time. It's hard for me to even be coy about this. The Super number 17 story arc is an absolute mess. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was a placeholder to buy time for the next arc to be developed. And I get that. I sympathize with it. It's hard to keep up the grind week after week, year after year. You do the best you can, hoping that words of brilliance will spring forth from your fingers one more time, but it feels like the water is constantly rising. You're never going to outlast it. Everybody hates you, you're never good enough, and all you can do is tread water the best you can until you inevitably drown in your own failure. Wait, what were we talking about? Oh, right. Dragon Ball. Production pipeline motivations aside, it's easy to see the appeal of a storyline like this. Artificial Human number 17 came onto the scene in the Cell arc with a bang, but essentially disappeared after that. Not only did he make but a single cameo appearance at the end of the Majin Buu arc, he didn't even receive a real exit in the Cell arc. It was stated that he came back to life, but we never actually saw him. Focusing a story on him seems like a no-brainer. Dr. Mew always came across like the Dr. Gero we have at home, so why not play into that by having the two of them team up? Not only is it a funny bit of lampshading, but it provides a respectable amount of context as to how number 17 could re-emerge as a competitive threat. And of course, as far as low-hanging fruit goes, writing it so that Hell and Earth have become connected not only opens the portal between worlds, but opens the portal to lots and lots of stupid fan service so old baddies can come back. I'm not saying I like it, but I understand why it would be tempting to write. Unfortunately, as I hope I can successfully illustrate during Dragon Ball Dissection, the show drops the ball on pretty much all of these points. By nature of my analysis, I rather have to ruffle feathers by necessity. Anything I criticize is inevitably going to be someone's favorite thing. But I feel I'm pretty safe on this one. Then again, I've been wrong in assuming that before. That said, it's not all doom and gloom. Like everything I cover here, I'm going to be fair and give credit where it's due. In fact, I'd like to start with some positives. I can totally say something nice without any qualifiers. As of this episode, we get a new ending theme, Blue Velvet. I love this song so much. It's definitely my favorite ending theme of GT. Look at that, in just over 40 episodes we've already had more ending songs than Dragon Ball Z had in nearly 300. I've never been fond of this trend that started around this time of anime constantly switching out theme songs. It just kills a show's sense of identity. Oh, okay, I guess that's already a qualifier to my compliment. Oops. But I love this song. Back in the olden days when I was first finding Dragon Ball fan sites online, a lot of these pages had MIDI tunes auto-playing. That was my introduction to a lot of the original Japanese theme songs, even if I didn't know that's what they were. All I could see was the file name as the browser loaded it in, so I assumed what I was listening to was called Blue Velvet. But I would go to individual pages of a site just to listen to various songs. And this one was my favorite to listen to. It just rocked so hard. Okay, one more qualifier. It's also the GT ending theme with the shortest tenure, lasting for only 9 episodes. And that's just unfortunate. This animation continues the theme of using nostalgic imagery, recreating a lot of Toriyama's art throughout the years. It reuses a sequence from the previous ending, specifically the GT reimagining of the manga spine art. It also goes a step further, updating the final panel of the manga to reflect the GT designs. That's pretty cool. I also really enjoy how this episode opens. Well, after the title card, we'll get back to the cold open in a minute after I'm done being nice. Bluma and Bra are breaking bread over at the Sun home, eating Mount Paozu delicacies and really loving them, until realizing they're things like Paozusaurus and chicken fried toad. It's a cute culture clash presented through various angles. As much as Pon plays herself off as a sophisticated lady, she loves this stuff because she grew up on it. Vidal's another interesting perspective. Having married into the family, she's not immediately predisposed to liking this type of food, but she tries to coax the city folk, admitting that it is pretty good once you get used to it. As an aside, I don't think I've gotten to mention this before, as they've shared very little screen time up until now, but Vidal's Minaguchi Yuko was also cast at the end of Dragon Ball Z to play Pon. At the exact same time, Bluma's Tsuru Hiromi was also cast as Bra. Now that they're adding to Nozawa Masako as Goku and his sons, we have a lot of voice actor overlap going on at this dinner table. In fact, of everyone present, Watanabe Naoko's Chi-Chi is the only person not doubling up on a role in this scene. What, you think Puar is going to show up? But continuing on about the fun character interactions, there's also this cute moment. After things get bad and everyone is discussing what to do about it, Goku... Well, it's fairly common in this series for Goku to express his excitement about getting ready to fight by using the phrase waku waku, which is exactly what I just said, an expression of excitement. Well, in this case, as Goku starts to say it, Chi-Chi finishes the waku waku part for him. And I just love that. It's amazing. Toei in general, and this series in particular, have given Chi-Chi some pretty awful stuff to work with. This, however, might just be my favorite expression of Goku's and Chi-Chi's dynamic. There's no anger or browbeating on her part. While Chi-Chi might be saying this a bit wryly, she clearly knows what her man wants and is willing to play along. I love it. And that's about all the positives I have for right now. And as you can see, everything I've complimented is stuff drifting on the periphery of the main story. That's not a great sign, is it? So let's get into that main story. In Hell, Dr. Gero recruits the recently deceased Dr. Mew to help him with a new artificial human number 17, because building another one will cause Earth and Hell to be linked so they can lure in Goku to... I can't even summarize this without making it apparent that it doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. At least when I covered the baby arc, it was all stuff that sounded good in the abstract. It was only when you dug into the details that you realized that there was no logic to it. And this puts me in a spot. Dragon Ball Dissection has been accused of being too nitpicky, and that's definitely subjective. One person's nitpick is another's fatal flaw, and vice versa. There's no hard, fast rule for what an audience can accept. For example, something I don't think I ever nitpicked when I covered the Cell arc is the idea that Dr. Garrow's creations could somehow be stronger than Frieza. I know a lot of fans are really bothered by that, but I'm not. I can also accept the conceit of infinite energy reactors in this fantasy world. I'm willing to give certain things leeway, and a big part of what allows us to accept something that might not be airtight logic is how invested we are in the story. For example, in live-action Sailor Moon, something I'm also doing videos on, hint hint, Kunzite is on hand to reassert his magical control over Dark Mercury immediately before she gravely injures Sailor Moon. And it's that act that allows Ami to finally come to her senses and have an emotional breakdown over what she's done. But wait, how would she have that opportunity? Kunzite was right there. Why doesn't he just hit her with dark energy again? Well, because he's gone now. I guess he needed a smoke break. And that's silly. It's a narrative cheat to force this scene to happen. And you know what? It's a problem, but I'm fine with it because the scene is so powerful that it's worth the small inconsistency that leads to it. I can acknowledge both of those things are true to me, but there does come a time when those nagging little inconsistencies pile up, and they pile up for something that is just not worth looking the other way for. And I hope that's enough context to get you through this because boy, do I have a lot to nitpick today. The most obvious low-hanging fruit issue with this premise is simply the fact that these villains have their bodies in hell. Toriyama's Dragon Ball has long established that this is not supposed to happen. But you know what? I'm gonna let them have this one. This is not Toriyama's Dragon Ball. Animated Dragon Ball has frequently shown villains in the afterlife keeping their bodies. This is a sequel to that continuity, so fine. That in and of itself is not a big enough problem to keep me from getting on board with this story. I could dig a little deeper into the details and point out the animated continuity's own inconsistencies in doing this. After all, they very much keep manga Goku's line asserting that bad guys like Cell don't get to keep their bodies when they die, only to show Cell with his body 3 episodes later. I could point out that while the Ginyu members do keep their bodies after they die, that is stated to be a favor that Enma did for Kaio, which is consistent with the manga's logic. That's not really a circumstance that should apply here. But fine, GT doesn't have to pay for the mistakes Dragon Ball Z made. We're saying all bad guys keep their bodies. Whatever. But now we're saying that 2 supervillains can be left totally unsupervised to work on mad science together? You're stretching that suspension of disbelief for me there. Now, as I said, we do have an animated example of Cell and Frieza making trouble in hell. 2 things there. One is that the issue is immediately spotted and reinforcements in the form of Goku and Paikuhan are sent to intervene. 2 is that example seems like some strong boys acting all rowdy, not dissimilar to a spontaneous prison riot. Both of those circumstances are believable, but somehow Dr. Mew and Dr. Garrow are able to create an entirely new life form? And nobody ever noticed. How? Does Hell have its own funded robotics department for the inmates to use? Where is that? Underneath the bloody pond? How did they do this? Where? For how long? How did they get the resources? It took Dr. Garrow over a decade to create the artificial humans for his first round of revenge, and that was with his own lab. But that brings me to the next problem. How do you make a number 17? Artificial human number 17 is not a robot, created from scratch with mechanical parts. He's a cyborg. He's just some regular guy that Dr. Garrow augmented. Yes, Megan, number 18 still has her uterus. That's my DBD on that. So even if we can accept that these scientists have their bodies and have access to laboratories, raw materials, and computers, how do they clone a guy they don't even have physical access to? Garrow credits Mew's machine mutant experience for helping to create this. Am I to believe then that they mutated some other denizen of hell to become a clone of number 17? That would be cool. It's something I'm completely making up in my own head. I kinda wish I could see it now. That would not only be a decent explanation, it would ratchet up the tension to actually see them twist and torture some poor soul. But it's not my job to write the story, so I don't know what's going on here. Somehow, a completely identical second number 17 just appears in hell, why not? Dr. Garo exposits that number 17 could have been stronger than Cell, except that he rebelled and was defective because of that. Now, Garo is going to get the chance to fulfill that potential, to make number 17 reach his Kanzentai, or perfect form. This reeks of baby exposition that's vague enough to sound reasonable until you give it the slightest bit of thought and realize that he's not saying anything at all. What does that even mean? Did Dr. Garo intend to keep working on number 17 but couldn't because he was killed? If number 17 was meant to be stronger than Cell, why was Cell created to use him as fodder? If Dr. Garo needs to build an entirely new number 17 to combine with the old number 17 in order to make the old number 17 into his perfect form, is it even reasonable to say the old number 17 was competitive with Cell at all? Ultimately, this one doesn't bother me as much. It's nonsense, but combining characters together is not exactly new territory. It is pretty telling that the kind of stuff I absolutely blasted the baby arc for is barely a blip on my radar here. And if Dr. Garo and Dr. Mew have all the resources necessary to build whatever they want, why don't they just build a perfect number 17 from scratch? Why even bother going through all the extra steps? Oh, well, that's because they need the two number 17s to link their energy in order to create a portal between Hell and Earth. What? What? What are you talking about? Oh, God. I think my brain just broke. How does building a cyborg link Hell and Earth? How does that follow at all? How did we get here? I don't see the connection. Even by genre fiction standards, even by wacky Dragon Ball logic, this is nonsense. And let me just point out that every bit of nonsense I've been tearing down for however many minutes this has been going on by this point is all stuff that is established before the first act break of the first episode. We're not even half an episode into this, but the show has been rapid firing so much craziness that it's taken just this long to get into it. And I'm not even done yet because the portal to hell thing by itself has so many layers. Later on in the arc, Piccolo decides that he and Dende can also make their own portal to hell by combining their powers across worlds. Again, I'm going to try to give credit here. That seems to suggest that anybody could do this, which is dumb, but trying to give credit. That seems to suggest that anybody could do this, that opening hell portals is not part of the basic but specific feature set of cyborgs. That in turn would suggest that building a number 17 for this purpose is primarily as a means of communication. They need somebody on the outside to link with them. Since they don't have any allies in the world of the living and no way to reach anyone even if they did, they basically build an antenna to talk to the original number 17. That is probably the most logic I can credit this premise with. Even so, though, how would they know they could do this? Hell and Earth connecting is not something that happens all that often. Even two gods didn't know about it until mimicking what they saw here. Those of you who have seen the end of the series might be pointing out that this whole portal thing is eventually revealed to be an effect of the problems we'll soon see with the Dragon Balls. Now, I usually try to keep Dragon Ball Dissection grounded in its original context. I have my doubts as to whether this idea was created at the time. Let me clarify. I know the idea of the Dragon Balls being in danger was created at this time. The image I'm holding on right now of a cracked Dragon Ball is from this arc. I'm questioning whether, instead of hinting at the next big story, it was intended to be the explanation for the whole Super Number 17 story. It certainly seems to me like something they pulled out of their butts later in order to try to make some sense of all this madness. And since it was months later, they were probably hoping their viewers had forgotten the details to the point that just saying, the Dragon Balls did it, is a good enough excuse. But I'm going to go ahead and address it here, just so I don't have to come back to it later. Let's say all of that is true in regards to the context of this story. On its own, that the Dragon Balls messing up could rip a hole in dimensions is more plausible. On its own. But as a justification for these number 17 events, it's so flimsy an excuse you're probably already thinking of the obvious question. How would the doctors even know what's happening with the Dragon Balls? With this later context, now we have to accept that two guys in hell have their bodies, have access to the ability to create artificial life forms, have no supervision to stop them from launching an evil plan, and on top of that, that they also just happened to team up at the exact same time a global catastrophe was already happening, and somehow both knew about it and knew how to capitalize on it. And it has to be both because we see that they have the power to open and close the portal themselves. On top of that, we also have to accept that while these two guys who have no connection to the Dragon Balls were able to figure all this out, two other guys who actually have experience creating them looked at all of this and went, I don't see a problem here. Let's open our own portal to hell. This is a classic voodoo shark. For those who aren't familiar with the term, it's a reference to Jaws 4: The Revenge, wherein a shark chases after all the members of the Brody family, seemingly out of a sense of revenge. And that's silly. It's so silly that the novelization tried to justify it by establishing that no, the shark doesn't naturally have the sentience necessary to formulate a revenge plan. Instead, this is the result of a voodoo curse. Okay, thanks for that. A voodoo shark, therefore, refers to an attempt by a story to explain away an incomprehensible detail, but in a way that only makes it even more incomprehensible than if they had just left well enough alone. You might find all of this to be nitpicking, but this is the most story content the arc even gives. This is the story. Almost everything else is a fight between Goku and number 17. This is the foundation on which that fight is based. Even if you are of the mind that the stories in Dragon Ball only exist as a means to contextualize the fight, you have to admit this doesn't even do a good job of that. What else is there to take away from this? Well, there is a bit more, which we'll of course get into next time. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the fan service yet. If we go to hell, we're contractually obligated to see Frieza and Cell. Yay. So that's whatever that was. Now that all of that is out of the way, we can continue on with the rest of whatever happens in this story arc. Honestly, the whole thing makes me a little dizzy, but it's fun to have a good rant every once in a while. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me hand in hand on this crazy, wild, wacky journey that means so much to all of us. Everyone, take care of yourselves. I will see you next time.